A 42-page leak exposed Fox News' darkest secret. Then Jasmine Crockett walked into Congress, and in one chilling moment, $32 million of silence went up in flames. At 2:37 a.m., an anonymous upload triggered what no lawsuit had managed in 2 decades, a reckoning. A 42-page internal Fox News dossier stamped "Confidential, internal use only" went live on a whistleblower site known for its precision and discretion. By dawn, the press had it. By noon, the public did too. Its contents? 6 settlements totaling over $47 million to silence harassment claims involving Bill O'Reilly. The largest, a $29.5 million payment to legal analyst Lise Wheel. What made this leak different wasn't just the money. It was the proof. O'Reilly's signature on every agreement. Internal emails in his voice, strategic, clinical. Contain exposure, minimize disruption, critical asset protection. There was no denial that could meet it. By day's end, social media was ablaze. Hashtags, hashtag no more NDAs, hashtag OR files, and most ominously, hashtag silence was the strategy. Fox News issued a terse line. "We are reviewing these documents." But the political winds were already turning. This was not speculation. It was structure. Coordinated, sustained, and legally engineered. Congress took notice. A hearing was called, public, televised, under oath. For the first time in U.S. history, a media figure would be questioned not for ratings or commentary, but for the financial architecture of silence that kept them untouchable. Chairing the inquiry was Representative Jasmine Crockett. A former civil rights lawyer, she was not known for theatrics. She didn't trend, she litigated. Her office released no flashy statements. Just a single phrase. "I believe the American people are owed answers." That was all. But for those who knew her record, it was enough to signal she wasn't coming to perform. In the days before the hearing, O'Reilly resurfaced in a grainy podcast filmed at home. "This is politics," he said. "This is not justice. I was never convicted." His voice was strained, absent of the authority that once dominated prime time. He used no notes. There was no makeup, no set. His fingers stayed off screen. The video spread quickly. Not for his words, but for what was missing, control. This time, the message didn't land. The old defenses rang hollow in a country that had already read the documents. This wasn't about criminal guilt. It was about moral systems. And as millions watched, the question emerged, what does justice look like for silence? 2 days later, Crockett entered the hearing room with a thin navy folder and no entourage. O'Reilly was already seated, expression frozen, shoulders drawn tight. Cameras clicked in polite violence. The gavel struck. O'Reilly leaned into the mic. "I'm a victim of cancel culture." Crockett didn't react. She opened her folder. She spoke once. "You're not a victim of cancel culture. You're a product of silence culture." And then, for the first time in decades, the man who had shaped narratives watched one reshape him. Jasmine Crockett didn't speak again for several minutes. She didn't need to. The document she placed on the desk did the work. It slid across the wood like any other legal file, but when it appeared on the monitors, the mood shifted. Title: Settlement Agreement between Lise Wheel and Bill O'Reilly. The amount: $29.5 million. The terms: absolute, lifelong silence. There were no accusations in her tone when she finally read the clause aloud. Recipient shall not speak to the press, to representatives of media, to legal counsel outside parties, or acknowledge the existence of this agreement. It was not dramatic. It was rote. But in its cold efficiency, it told everyone what they needed to know. This wasn't about apology. It was about erasure. Crockett continued without flair. "This was not a post-trial arrangement. No judge, no jury, just money." Her voice stayed low, clear. "This isn't a settlement. It's a muzzle." O'Reilly shifted, his hands curling against the table edge. "This was a legal decision," he muttered. "To protect my family from headlines. People think money equals guilt. It doesn't. It equals survival." But his voice betrayed him, measured but brittle. He wasn't convincing the room. He was trying to convince himself. That's when Crockett tapped the panel in front of her. The lights dimmed. A date appeared on screen, May 22, 2012. Studio surveillance footage played, grainy and silent. O'Reilly, mid-segment break, looked off camera. A technician entered his sight line. "If you're going to walk into my shot, at least pretend you belong here," he said. Then, without turning fully to her, "Do you want to be on camera, sweetheart, or do you want to keep your job?" The room stayed still. No gasps, no murmurs. Just the weight of the voice when it wasn't performing. It wasn't illegal. But it was undeniable. The kind of moment that sits deeper than shouting. Crockett returned to the microphone. "You used to host a segment called the No Spin Zone," she said flatly, "where facts mattered. Today, Mr. O'Reilly, there's nowhere left to spin." He didn't reply. Didn't look up. Then came the turn. Crockett tapped the mic. "The committee will now hear sworn testimony from Subject Delta." A blurred face filled the screen. A voice, electronically modified. "I was 26. I thought I was moving up." Then the door closed. The story unfolded simply. No tears. Just detail. She reported it. 4 days later, she was handed a check and a silence clause. The camera didn't cut away. No one moved. And for the first time, the question wasn't whether O'Reilly had done something wrong. It was how many times. Subject Delta's voice disappeared, but the silence she left behind didn't. Crockett didn't speak. The monitors stayed dark. The room sat in it, what had been said, and everything that hadn't. Then, without pause or preamble, she reached into her folder again. This time, it wasn't a letter or legal brief. It was a spreadsheet. No title page. No summary. Just rows. Line after line of financial transactions. Amounts: $385,000. $680,000. $1.1 million. Labeled with unnerving precision: Studio B incident, NBA extension, locker room discussion, HR override, junior editor post-incident resolution, third payout. Not names. Just roles. Timelines. Amounts. Every entry originated from the same account, Mercer and Fenwick PC. The legal shell Fox used for private settlements. Every line dated. Every payment signed off. Crockett didn't explain the document. She let it speak. And it did. It was method, not mistake. Quiet decision stacked like bricks in a wall designed to hold back daylight. When she did speak again, her voice was steady. "This isn't a pattern," she said. "It's infrastructure." O'Reilly didn't look up. His jaw had gone still. His eyes were locked on the space between his folded hands. What had once been dismissed as individual claims now sat reassembled, clinical and devastating. The spreadsheet remained on screen. Crockett didn't look at it. "The strategy wasn't silence," she said. "It was enforcement." She waited. Then read one final transaction aloud. $510,000, analyst. Subject, honor comment. Terms, no public record. Penalty clause triggered if discussed in therapy. There were no raised voices in the room. But several pens stopped moving. Even the committee stenographer paused, fingers hovering. Across the table, O'Reilly's grip on the mic tightened. "This isn't justice," he said suddenly. "This is theater." He raised his voice, not with confidence, but with effort. "You want your moment? You got it. You think you're saving anyone?" He turned finally toward Crockett. "Lise. The woman you keep quoting. She got paid. She was fine with it. She built a career because of me." Crockett said nothing. Instead, she reached for an envelope resting beside her folder. One sheet. Handwritten. No signature, but unmistakably hers. She read it aloud. "I don't need an apology. I need someone to make sure this never happens again." She folded the paper and placed it beside the spreadsheet. Then sat still. O'Reilly didn't move. The room didn't move. Because everyone knew, it wasn't about what had happened. It was about what had always been allowed to happen. The hearing room, packed shoulder to shoulder, had gone quiet again, not out of respect, but recoil. The data was no longer abstract. It had shape now, form, timeline, strategy. For a long time, no one said anything. And then Jasmine Crockett asked the only question that mattered. "How many women," she said, measured, almost soft, "walked into your office and didn't walk out whole?" It didn't echo. It landed. Without punctuation, without rise. Not for drama, but precision. Across from her, O'Reilly's mouth parted slightly. But there was no answer. Not because he wasn't ready, but because no answer wouldn't open a door to more. He looked not at Crockett, not at the committee, but at the desk. His hands tightened. His lips pressed together. He blinked slowly, as if trying to delay time. Finally, he spoke. A whisper, really. They want my career dead, he said. Not a defense. Not anger. Not even defiance. Just a sentence from someone watching his world retract. Crockett sat still. No expression. No notes in hand. She leaned forward only slightly. They don't want your career dead, she said. They want you to remember. He flinched, but said nothing. Because what followed wasn't a scolding. It was surgical. To remember the conversations that weren't jokes. The looks that weren't harmless. The silence that wasn't protection, it was exhaustion. The committee didn't interrupt. Even the panel's most senior members stared ahead, hands folded. The staffers behind them had stopped typing. Crockett continued. You were allowed to forget because the system made it easy. Contracts, checks, briefings, strategic assets. But they remembered. Every one of them. Still no reaction from O'Reilly. Just the slow realization that the microphone he once used to define the news now heard something he could no longer shape. The cameras didn't zoom in. They didn't need to. The posture alone told the story. And that's when it changed. The silence, the final one, didn't come from the documents or the testimonies. It came from him. He didn't rebut. He didn't excuse. He simply stopped. Because this wasn't a moment of defeat. It was the exact second when a man raised to believe his narrative could outrun consequence realized that this time, it wouldn't. The hearing adjourned without ceremony. No applause. No dramatic close. Just the quiet rustling of chairs and the low hum of microphones being powered down. But the moment didn't fade, it multiplied. The clip of Crockett asking, "How many women walked into your office and didn't walk out whole?" appeared online less than an hour later. Within a day, it had been translated, subtitled, and clipped into hundreds of different languages and formats. Some framed her question. Others froze the image, Crockett, still and composed. O'Reilly, hunched, eyes down, silent. But the most widely shared clip wasn't about confrontation. It was the spreadsheet. Not what it revealed, but how it looked. Plain, administrative, designed to disappear inside a filing system. That, more than anything, is what stunned people. Not scandal, but routine. By the end of the second day, the New York Attorney General announced a formal investigation into Fox News's use of non-disclosure agreements, citing credible evidence of systemic legal coercion. There were no cameras at the announcement. Just a 3-paragraph release and a line about subpoenas being prepared. That same day, something else happened, quietly, legally, but historically. A group of women once bound by NDAs filed an emergency motion in civil court to have their silence lifted. The request: allow them to speak in light of new public interest and emerging patterns of harm. It took 2 more days, but the ruling came down, the court found credible grounds to suspend 3 confidentiality clauses pending review. For the first time, some of the women could speak without risking breach. And speak they did. In Fairmont, a former assistant producer wrote in the Washington Post, "Silence was not my choice. It was the price I was told to pay for safety." In Carolina, a makeup artist went viral reading the contract she'd once been told to burn. In D.C., a junior editor posted her NDA online with 3 words. "I remember everything." These weren't headlines. These were patterns. And O'Reilly? He said nothing. His podcast went dark. Public appearances cancelled. No interviews. No rebuttals. The absence said more than any press release could. And through it all, Crockett never spiked the ball. She issued no personal statements, gave no interviews. Just one line from her office. "We were never here to destroy a man. We were here to stop a machine." By week's end, the cracks had spread well beyond O'Reilly. What began as a single congressional hearing turned into a legal landslide. Former executives were named in subpoenas. Corporate counsel from Fox was called in for quiet interviews with federal investigators. Advocacy groups launched formal petitions urging the Department of Justice to expand its review, not just of Fox, but of all media outlets that had used NDAs to bury misconduct. In courtrooms across the country, something unprecedented began to unfold. Judges started to question the enforceability of older confidentiality agreements. For years, the legality of NDAs had been treated as sacred, contracts signed, sealed, closed. But now, under a new lens, they were being re-examined as tools of coercion. And then came the ruling that changed everything. A federal judge in the Southern District of New York issued a rare, binding opinion. In cases where contracts had been used to shield systemic abuse or suppress credible allegations of harm, the First Amendment could not be overridden. Speech, the judge wrote, is not a commodity to be leased indefinitely, especially when its silence protects patterns of harm. The ruling was clear: truth was not breach. After that, the stories came faster. A former guest booker detailed an incident in a studio hallway. A teleprompter operator described whispered threats. A segment assistant posted a photo of her contract with only a caption: "I was told this made it go away." One by one, the voices that had once been legally muted began to speak. Not in outrage. Not even in unison. Just clearly. And Crockett? She was working. Not in front of cameras. In committee. 3 weeks after the hearing, she quietly introduced a new bill, the Federal Media Accountability and Victim Protection Act. 84 pages. No fanfare. No rollout event. Just language. The proposal was surgical. It required all media companies with public broadcasting licenses to disclose the number and nature of monetary settlements related to misconduct. It prohibited the use of NDAs in harassment or abuse cases moving forward. And it opened the possibility, carefully, narrowly, for retroactive review of prior agreements if they were found to conceal harm. Opposition was swift. Corporate lobbyists mobilized. News executives called it overreach. Conservative outlets dubbed it the Crockett Censorship Bill. But outside the halls of power, a different conversation was happening. Survivors called it something else: a start. The bill's path through Congress was not smooth. Hearings were tense, committee votes razor-thin. Lobbyists flooded lawmakers' inboxes with memos warning of unintended consequences and constitutional entanglements. Some media networks quietly threatened to scale back political coverage if the bill advanced. Others argued it would create a chilling effect on internal conflict resolution. Crockett responded with none of the tactics she had used in the hearing. No evidence drops. No viral sound bites. Just hours spent in meetings, briefings, quiet negotiation. She visited offices both sympathetic and skeptical, often alone. Her staff said she worked through most nights. No press saw her in the halls. But they saw the bill move, slowly, stubbornly, without compromise. And then came the second rupture. During the Judiciary Committee's public review, one of the most powerful anchors in cable news, never publicly accused of misconduct, resigned without explanation. Within hours, an open letter was published. It was signed by 36 former employees, including producers, makeup artists, and junior writers. None used his name. Instead, they listed dates, studio floors, and settlement numbers. They didn't demand action. They didn't call for boycotts. They said, "We didn't forget. We waited." Within 48 hours, 3 major networks issued new internal guidance on the use of NDAs. One began reviewing past settlements. Another launched an anonymous reporting line with no in-house legal oversight. A third canceled the long-planned series on cancel culture. The tide had turned, not just publicly, but structurally. And still, Crockett said little. She granted one interview, to a small public radio station in her district. When asked what moment stayed with her most, she didn't mention the confrontation, or the spreadsheet, or the silence that followed. She said, "It was when I realized that truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs enough space to stand up." 3 weeks later, the bill passed the House. Narrowly. But it passed. And on the morning it reached the Senate floor, Crockett stood alone in the chamber before the vote. No statement. No speech. Just her hand resting briefly on the railing as the clerk read the title aloud. The cameras didn't linger. But someone captured a photo, her head bowed slightly, the same folder from the hearing still in her grip. Nothing new in her posture. But everything had changed. Because the system hadn't collapsed. It had been seen. And in that seeing, something unbreakable had begun.